So we'll start with the story of the mystery image and how does it lead to our topics and connect to them. So yes, like it starts with the crypto commons gathering and their various channels. So I really cannot meme. I cannot write something so short, um, which kind of precluded my participation in this in the various channels. But then I, as kind of annoyed by this, I made a promise that well, I just developed gems, or I didn't call them gems at that point, but I developed games. I make a meme that is a game, which I had a vague idea. Like I knew it was sort of possible, but of course, like how to make it was another question of details. But yeah, like I visited the topic on and off, and then I kind of finally pushed myself yesterday. I made a kind of this sort of simple. I can show that as well, but it kind of lengthens the story. But I'll show it maybe later. Like a simpler, more like a board game, which I called like Picker, uh, and but it was really already a playable meme that you get something meme-like. Actually, let's see, like because maybe it makes sense to go one folder pack, and then here we go. So yeah, you should see this. So this was the picker.
Yeah.
Yeah, like so the idea was that you have like I picked very normal, especially for the so-called meme titles or meme phrases. Um, but then there's a sort of modularity that you could change the image or the palette of terms. But the key thing is then you have a playability which is kind of fairly apparent, which is like place the terms where you want. So you can say, just a fancy, that this is Elon Musk and the crypto nerds are these, which makes it kind of interestingly theoretically meaningful. And this is they're actually riding on shitcoins, and the elder capitalists are hovering in the air, ultimately maybe in the same space as Elon Musk. So it goes. But of course, you could do this imaginatively, like you just place them in your mind. But you could also turn it into even a multiplayer game, like one places one and another player places another. And then it can actually kind of change because you might actually not even play towards the meme, or you could, but you can also kind of play to twist the other player, things like this. So proof of concept, like you can make a meme that is just with the slight change actually starts to behave like a game. Hence, I have the right to call it a geme, which was short for gamed memes. Um, Gemes or games, like, but yeah, but that's a proof of concept. This is actually much more interesting, I think. So, and why this relate to us is because it actually kind of is based on particularly scene, but it actually incorporates all the other stuff, role, etc. And it kind of takes that kind of an approach and puts it on a kind of context of a meme. So, like, even though, let's say, the typology and styles of expression here are mostly meme-like, the functionality is potentially different. So think of this as a scene that you're about to play. That you get this, but it actually kind of the mindset is that, okay, this is a scene that I'm playing. And you have this sort of conditions, like there's a duck that squeaks arias, but the singer is really tenorfish, or whatever the fish is called. And then these are actually carrot zombies, and singing them makes them feel alive, and they also float on water, but can't really swim, they just drift. But this is unfinished. I put it because I've developed different styles, then on a different color, you have this sort of questions that are kind of inspiration. Like you don't have to use this holy altar for carrot zombies, but maybe not. But it might kind of like, oh, okay, so it means that the carrot zombies are coming to the holy altar. But oh yes, and the water comes is pissed by the butterflies, whatever that means. But you see, like it's pushing you into this sort of short shift. It's not taking you to an end and doesn't really give you a beginning, but it's almost like a moment in a game that you start to figure out for yourself, like, yeah, maybe it's like the carrot zombies have arrived to the shore, but then now there's this water, and they are unsure to float, or maybe there is a negotiation between the butterflies and the carrot zombies. And to that end, the missing part I was meaning to put in the lower right corner, like different things under the category of you. Like, for example, you are the negotiator between the carrot zombies and the butterflies. Or you are, I had some others. Um, I can't remember them. But anyway, like, so with slight kind of little insertion of a system, the kind of playability is supported, like this sort of the the meme descriptions are almost like kind of puzzles for you, but they are complementary to each other, like that they are about dynamics of the situation. The questions are kind of angles, and the U is a role, essentially. But the whole thing is a scene. Like if you think about it back to our playing time sessions, like it's very much a package of a scene, but now hybridized with a meme. That it takes the scene principles and puts them in a meme context, roughly speaking. But that opens a lot of doors, which is why I'm kind of still thinking about opening this, is because, well, that means that if you have these scenes, well, you could have this kind of framework for a role as well. Like you have a picture of a person, and then it's, let's say it's your character, so to speak, so you can add descriptions as you play along, and you might actually bring it alongside this, that it's that character in this situation. Uh, and if that character changes, you kind of add descriptions like a meme, but it's still like functions like a character. You can make a location, like you approach the descriptions a little bit differently. Like it's more about supporting how it's like a location, not like this sort of scene like dynamism in here. And then that puts it back to the sort of possible realms, because somebody might say, oh, in my world, I have this location and that location. And, and if the players are in this location, they might next get to that location. Or you can take it into a more story-like line, is that somebody makes a collection of like these 5 genes in a row. Um, and people play them in a row, so it's almost behaving like a story. So you have this sort of, essentially it opens up to this sort of world likeness, but in this sort of possible realm sense. But it's still kind of stealthily behaves like a meme context. It's just expanded to be not just playable, but potentially world-like. And it can even utilize normal memes, alongside these genes. So that's kind of like on the or that's what's behind it in itself.
Amazing. I'm remembering there's a couple of meme accounts I follow that have these recurring characters. So there's
Mm.
world building meme universe. Comments just sort of like what becomes canon and what's not, and it's like, yeah, kind of like a collect telling. I guess there similarities with this,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think, yeah, this is like a very like the intersection between memes and scenes
Mm-hmm.
seems like a very productive space.
Yeah, and it essentially opens it up to have like a full-fledged palette of, say, an RPG. That because you can make characters, you can make locales, locations, you can make, but you could also make items like on a card. But then you can also make relations by making like something map-like and present somewhere, and then the locations can spot onto a map. And sub-locations, there is a picture of a house that is in a city, which is another picture. So it's not really missing anything. Of course, the resolution here is this sort of more conversational. Of course, you could add something to that as well. But I think there is an interesting quality into this sort of like that the rules are sort of loose, which is true of how memes behave like towards their meanings and images. So it's actually kind of taking a similar. Mm, hello, Jakob. Oh, my
Hi,
camera
everyone.
is again. I'll reboot my camera again. But yeah, like uh, so we're for Jakob, we're having a short recap of what was the image. Uh, you missed most of it, but I can give you a rundown at some point. Um, but but yeah, like it's yeah, it's an interesting as a direction overall, and like with the picker gene, uh, which I posted in the Crypto Commons gathering, there was already surprising amount of interest, at least from my expectations. Um, so uh, yeah, maybe it even takes off. But I do think it actually wouldn't have been born without this process around the thematics of the scene and the other uh, operative concepts we've been using.
I think it's very powerful memes as a way of like building blocks of communication, because they are already kind of designed to engage people. So it's great if you bring them under the same discourse, and also by like connect with an image. So I lots of like power to engage people into playing it.
Yeah, I think so. Like okay, just yeah, got the camera going. Like and it's also something that like I mean potentially it doesn't have to, but it's something that XORG could take into its palette if it wants to, because like I said, like it wouldn't have been born without this discussions anyway. I of course the scene idea existed, but like the fact that it was on my mind and then also it has been expanded in our discourse, I think it kind of enabled to think about it that way. But there was already an invite from a what's its Chris? What's his last name from Gitcoin? I think. Do you know Jakub Chris? Starts with an I. Isok or
Not sure, not sure.
yeah. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But he's some figure in the Gitcoin circles. But he invited to run a hackathon on memes on this gene theme already, which was um, like an interesting opening in itself. But I like I said this larger framework. This sorry for Jakub that this is kind of like a referring to information earlier, that how they can turn into word-like structures, and then how with that they also open up this sort of a different frame of expectation. Like the expectation in a normal meme is still like you're kind of the consumer. Do you like it or not? You're like, it's good, it's not good. It's like looking at an artwork or reading a book. But if the point is actually, no, it's actually a scene that you kind of have to create and everything is behaving like ingredients, it makes it very different in terms of the relation style that it can offer.
I also think that the exploration of playing something and then releasing it as a meme is kind of has potential to engage people in like a tone live that the game sort of like gets crystallized in a flat surface, and then it's able to like circulate as a meme. So I think that can be very, very.
And it kind of actually repeats many of the themes that we have in a kind of nutshell form or in the kind of frame of the meme. For example, capture. So if, say, somebody plays the scene, my internet is shitty today, but I'll share it just for Jakub. Also, Jakub knows kind of what we're talking about. Maybe my internet lasts. So if you get this essentially puzzle and you play this scene, maybe alone, maybe with other people, doesn't really matter, but you could create the results of that by modifying maybe the same picture, like maybe adding, maybe replacing things, which is also very meme-like, and now you have a capturation point in itself. Like so, whatever happened could be captured, and then somebody might take your capture, take your save, and or not. So yeah. But yeah, like it's rather new-ish. Like I put the picker meme, well, showed that, which is like putting terms from like a board game out yesterday, and by the response, maybe this seems to be interesting. So, but given that it's yesterday, I haven't thought about it further, like in terms of world domination or whatever. But I also think maybe it's interesting to try to coin the gene concept, because for me there is a sort of an interesting political move there, which is about like this sort of consumer position versus active position, active player position in the meme context. But yeah.
Also, both words are very similar, game and meme, at least in English, how they're written. Yeah, pronunciation is very different, but yeah, like the sort of the meme as the scene and the board, and sort of like playing with it, but in parallel there's like this collective meme construction that also all games have like a shareable result. That's like I don't know, like a powerful concept.
Yeah, I mean it's something we can put on the optional thought board, like if that's interesting. It seems that like these kind of things tend to draw people, as seemed to be apparent from the yesterday's response, which was only the picker, like because I thought it was more ready. But I think the kind of more scene based, which then opens to role based, which then opens to other things, it's a much more powerful thing. And I haven't even kind of put anything of that in public. So at least I'm hoping that could lead to a more opening up of these possibilities and maybe more interesting in that sense. But yeah, that I thought was interesting also as this sort of random test that does it communicate itself maybe. But I think kind of communicating how to use these things is also a matter of culture. It's true of memes as well. So um, there's all kinds of weird meme branchings already, which are dependent on cultural understanding. Mm, but yeah, like, but that's uh, probably from my side of this recent phenomena, um, or just about everything that I can think of now saying about it. But any other comments, ideas, um, Mikael, Jakub? I know Jakub, you kind of, since you're working on partial information, it might be slightly partially confusing. But if you
Yeah,
have
it's
comments,
good. I was following the CCG thread, so I think.
yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of I started just like thinking about the potential of the different sort of like maybe um, what if we have some sort of like image collages or some sort of like scrambled images or something like that. Will it confuse? Are there some potential? So on. Don't know.
I think it's like memes themselves. It's just a branching. Maybe that branching takes interest, maybe it doesn't. But like every mutation is kind of okay, acceptable. Like in and like like with this basic twist of looking at the the meme space rather than this, for example, the scene creation space, it opens actually a lot of structural possibilities. Like for example, uh, let's take that your character is the meme. You pick a picture, you keep on adding to it text to actually describe the character in this sort of meme but modified kind of manner. But it could just as well be a collage or selection or series of 3-4 pictures. So maybe you add another to grow it in a way. So there's not only kind of like possibilities of what is the representation, but a certain representation might serve a certain kind of play use. So it's really like once you open that twist, it actually kind of can correspond with um, many of the structures that we have been discussing.
Yeah, would actually be very interesting to see made out of it, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something to think about. Like what if one puts out a basic uh, compilation of different types slash games of genes, um, like um, or games. Apparently, I was almost outvoted. Like from Common Stack, Jeff and Jessica were hard on that they should be pronounced games, but I don't care. Uh, but like yeah, maybe if one puts out like here's one type, here's another type. It's an interesting, very small publication release angle as well, like that one could think of, which might raise interest, I think. But it's mostly like up to consideration, I think, however people feel about it.
I don't know, it's a very stupid thing that I will say, but when you shared the image, of course you diagram, and I felt it was like it was already crystallized and flattened to my view, so I saw it, of course, as a finished thing.
Mm-hmm.
There was a degree of inaccessibility, but then you show the Photoshop, like how it was made, and it suddenly becomes like it acquires depth. and you're able to construct it, play in it, like it becomes a board to be played. And that's sort of like going from flattened to space that opens up has a lot of potential, I believe.
Yeah, it's true. I like this is also why I was testing of making them in Photopea, because Photopea is open to everybody, free for everybody, and it kind of does everything needed. And in some ways, it's better, like in the amount of fonts, essentially. Like so, like it kind of makes it possible to make that kind of play. And there's also so Photopea doesn't do um, multiple users at the same time, but there is another that does. So it's like a certain branching of like certain instrumentality in on top of the structure, certainly. Like, but of course for memes there is always the possibility, like how memes are often played is like, okay, somebody makes an interesting meme, somebody hunts for the original, like the empty image, and then people kind of like use whatever to manipulate it. And I do think like that's always a possibility. But I think like these sort of instrumentalities um, um, like the photopea, for example, is an uh, additional power in the mix. But yeah, maybe it's something to one can think about it um, uh, for the coming weeks, and maybe it kind of opens up ideas. I'm thinking of putting anyway this sort of much more expanded this scene-based model out into the space of the crypto commons gathering meme channel. Given that it's a good testing group, then and it's already gotten interested with this. So, but overall, I think like it could just as well be something that XORG takes as its own if it wants to. But yeah, that's it. And of course, it took longer than I hoped. But the conversation, I'm blaming the conversation. Like that was the real reason why it took a longer time. But I do think like I also wanted to open that as a direction precisely because it's actually just another application of the structures we've been using, which I think is also important because it opens up the point that these structures they have a certain power, and what is the generality, which can be a weakness, but there is also a strength in that if you take the approaches, they can find or bring their kind of structuring into other contexts, and this is kind of proof of concept of that in a meme context. Still working, yes. But yeah, so but that's maybe enough of that, unless somebody has something still to add. Um, but we could open to these two topics. Like the wish was that we have some time spent to this sort of future directions, and but there would also be kind of playtesting, um, not to be too much in this sort of discussion mode. And I wanted to ask, like, which one you would like to do first. Um, like personally, I have a bridge for towards the future directions, which kind of actually goes from this gym and then what it kind of maybe entails for let's say the reconfiguring or refactoring of the OBOK, because I think it opens up a certain direction, and also touches upon the XORG actually. So maybe it would be faster in this sense, like being able to rely on something that is already said. But how do you feel?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Sounds good.
So, so I was reading the earlier versions of both OBOK and XORG as, I mean, they're different, slightly different in their approaches, but of course the XORG relied on very much similar structurality. It just made a kind of slightly more detailed game structure out of this, like use of a scene and so on and so forth. But it brought to my mind this, that like one way to express this would be to take the paradigm of organization and then kind of detail what would it mean if organizations would be built out of these kind of basic concepts, and these kind of basic operations. Now, that could contain, and probably should contain, the like the color that it makes them playable, but it also opens up this sort of like possibility of thinking organizations in this wider sense. To take a practical example, like if the scene is written more like almost like in these two forms, that there is a general explanation of like how to think things as scenes, but then there is also like practical forms, is like, okay, now that you know how to think things as scenes, here's one way to play it, and here's maybe another. This can put this sort of sense that okay, every organizational situation can be thought of as scene, but it can also be a situation that is not live, but it's a way to describe a situation that, for example, should be like even a meeting, but then like the expanse of what that scene could be is essentially rather wide, like wider than the normal conventions would make it. That you can have like a what would be an example, like for example, you can use this sort of almost like fictional perspective, like, oh, now I take a different role in this situation, or now this bulletin board it has these rules upon it, and now because we switch a scene, it's different rules. There is a flexibility in this that is actually, I could say, almost immediately useful for thinking organizations in general, but it also kind of at the same time transforms them into game-like things. But the same goes for all the other things in OBOK. It has the role, and it's similarly colored, like the sense of like, oh, my role can change. It could be for 5 minutes. It doesn't matter if it seems semi-fictional or really proper or not proper, because they actually kind of come from the same source. In a way, like making somebody a graphic designer is still a sort of fiction put on the person. It just might be practical fiction. It might be that, okay, you are good at graphic designing, therefore you make this take this magical invisible hat, and suddenly you're the graphic designer. And then the fact that you have then certain rights, well, that's kind of like having moves in the game of the organization itself. Like these really overlap. Yes, exactly. RPG class graphic designer. So there's sort of like a double explanation, like which would be like, let's explain this as concepts so people understand the kind of overlap, that actually normal organizations can be read through this kind of a system. But if they're read through this system, the palette of making them expands. That's I guess one way to summarize it. but then making these sort of practical cases, like you could design it this way or that way, allows to think about the both the composition forms of organizations, but at the same time, kind of the playability of them. Because once you think the practical examples, it's the most easiest way and most sensible way to write them is in a kind of a game form in general. So in a way, like one could take that kind of redrafting perspective towards OBOK and making it kind of communicate both towards like people who are in the traditional organization mind space and kind of tell them that actually if you come here, you're expanded, but you lose nothing. But then that's essentially inviting them into play space, which also makes it able to communicate to gamers. But then looking at this latest playtest, I mean, there's a lot there, but a couple of things I would just raise up from there is that it already brings a certain interesting perspective of kind of an extra element of tokens, but from an interesting angle. Like, for example, in the XORG, the tokens played in a certain way. There were these things that you could, like, essentially issuing them. The issuance logic was a move. That is, everyone has, when they're making a move, they can choose the move of issuing a token. That's the issuance logic. It's actually fairly strict in a way, but it's just in a weird place if one thinks of tokens normally. But it's logical and it's very structured in a way. But then the use of the tokens was that they were able to build emphasis to an issue, that the issue that the token is placed upon, well, it gets an extra description, but it also becomes like more important to the game itself. And now this is actually still like very much concordant with normal token logic, because then if you would build let's say another interaction where you would say, okay, now we take all these topics that have tokens on them and process them in a different manner, we give them more time. This would be the value or the reason why you would play these tokens. And this is, of course, just one perspective, but it opens up this sort of like combination or bridging between tokens and point structures in gaming. And I think it would be a good way to explain the tokens and how they can be used in organizations. And it's not like it would once again contain tokens, even money, in the sense that, oh, there's this person who has the right to give this right of distributing from the funds of the organization to other people by the logic of every 30 days giving a certain sum that is in a contract. It's that in itself is not any more like, or it's just as rule bound than say the example in the XORG. But like from these kind of perspectives, you could open like how tokens can be a useful structure in organization, but not just like, yes, like money, yes, like crypto, but also in a wider sense. But they can all be comprised in this sort of a general view, which I think yes, one can potentially explain. And there were some other things, but like I've talked too long anyway. But like essentially that for me is pointing out this sort of like a, in a way, like a translation of structures of organization into this sort of OBOK language as one way to redraft OBOK, which might be interesting. But I don't know. Any comments on that?
To me, the sort of frame of rights, as you've explained before, to understand things in what rights you get when something happens, has been very profound in understanding property, for example, things that are terms that are opaque, kind of open up through the lens of the rights you acquire through processes, right? So yeah, in this example, I do see tokens as right giver. Very good framework to demystify, for example, voting and delegation.
Yeah,
which I would find for organizations, particularly in crypto land, where votes are very pervasive. I would say, like, I don't know. I think they should be problematized. So yeah, that sounds really good.
yeah, and it's also like the rights. I think I mean, one could call them also capacities, capabilities, affordances. Like, I don't even really care about the label so much. It's more about the structure, like, but and even moves. That's a whole nother thing that maybe is a worthwhile topic for some other moment, is that they are actually, they overlap very heavily. What is the idea of a move and what is the idea of a right, especially the move in these newer games, but also older actually. They they are very close. They are like siblings, and close enough that you can kind of take them in the same ballpark. But this direction forms this sort of, for me, a rather elegant way of thinking a certain kind of fundamental level, like for example, property and ownership. Well, I often put this question for people both in crypto and traditional finance, that, like, especially in crypto, when people tend to emphasize the token side, even when talking about ownership, I ask, like, can anybody name an ownership that is not actually founded on an organization of some sort? Like, whether that's a nation, whether that's a platform. And I don't think such a thing exists. It's actually against the very concept, because the uh, when we think of our ownership of a house or whatever, fridge, uh, the actual supporting structure for that stems usually from a nation, um, of some kind, and then the laws, and that whole organization in itself becomes the, you can say, enforcement, but it's also enforcement and support structure. But without that enforcement and support structure, that organization, that ownership simply does not exist. It's nothing. Like, this is also why, when, say, these kind of laws would disappear, it would be kind of free grab for all, or whoever has the physical power can take the items, because there is no structure for ownership. But then, like, the rights themselves from that then point out that the ownership actually breaks down into this sort of more Lego pieces. Like, then, so those two things, like that there is an organizational basis, which is more fundamental to thing like an ownership in itself, and then that this kind of rights, capacities, capabilities thinking allows one to think like, actually the ownership is just this amalgamate, a synthesis, but it means a lot of things which are actually separate and different in different cases. So if one wants to actually understand what's there, then this sort of thinking in terms of rights, like, I have a right to, like, you can go different levels. I have the right to hold the key. If you're taking my key to my apartment or car, that's wrong, because I have the right to decide who holds the key. Um, I have a right to drive it, but I can also, if somebody asks to loan the car, I have a right to decide to loan it. Like, it's a lot of rights, but essentially, like, this starts to take you into the nitty-gritty. Like you're one level down in the fractal and you're seeing the connections essentially. And then tokens actually come on that level as kind of instrumental level, that they are like, I think there are many ways to think about them, but my common way of thinking tokens is essentially units of distribution or distribution logics. And by unit, I mean that it's able to package itself, like to unitize that I am this. There is, of course, a unit logic, like fiat currency has the logic that €1 and another euro they're fungible, they can replace each other. But essentially, there is always the sense of a unit, because the unit allows it to be mobile and transfer itself. And then the distribution is the logic, like, for example, it can contain the issuance, like the XORG token had in its distribution logic, the sense that it issues from the moves if the moves are chosen, and then its other part of its distribution is that it has a place where it can go. So this is maybe stretching a bit the concept of distribution, but generally it's that direction. And why that level is instrumental is because now when we have rights, we have organization, what the tokens really do is to take this and make them behave differently. Like we can package this right into this token, and then we know if the token is there, then the right is there. If we know that the token is here, then the right is here, and so on and so forth. But now you're already kind of far along covering most of the token functionality, like, or fiat currency, like your NFT is a carrier of a right, and that right is to log in and see a work. If you transfer that NFT, what you're really doing is using an instrument to transfer your right, and then it goes somewhere else because that's what that instrument allows you to do. But it can also curtail it, and that's part of its distribution logic. So there, like, it kind of for me, like, I know that's a lot of abstraction, but I do think it's still simpler than many other ways of thinking about it, thinking about token economies, etc. While at the same time it allows you to really look at the detail level. Yeah.
I'd be curious. Not sure if this is the right place or if it's completely different discussion. But when you were speaking about kind of, I think even one more level, like one level deeper or somehow deeper conception around rights, which is distinguishing the potentialities. Would this be a part of? Yeah, when we speak about rights or capabilities, how would you relate those two kind of qualities or those two complementary? I don't know. How would you call it even?
Like complementary.
Yeah, when we were speaking about that, when we speak about because it was actually more related to the concept of offers, and then like that actual, what is, and then what can be, kind of the potentiality.
Yeah, potential and actual.
Yeah, but that was more, I guess, related to offers than rights, right? This kind of distinction.
They are actually related, and this kind of, like, it might be a little bit of a deep dive, and maybe we can visit like at length at some other context, but just to make the connection is that so the quality of offers is not just in the offers, this sort of quality that they define potential, like emphasis on both words, define and potential. That is, like, even a traditional offer is like, I'm selling this thing for 10 euros. Like, I'm selling this fancy coffee cup for 10 euros. The interesting thing is the selling has not yet happened. So it makes it like very much an expression in potential. Like potential being a concept of like you have actuality, you have potentiality, which is not just anything, but it's a space of traceable possibilities. Like so it's a very interesting quality in offers, and one of the key reasons why economy is seen as different from traditional organization. I would say one of the key things is it's heavily relies on offer relations, whereas traditional organizations are heavily rely on kind of order relations. It's like I say this, and that means that that person has to do this and this. This is not pure like organizations have offer relations. Voting is such. Like you can take voting as like you can vote is an offer to you. Of course, it could be made compulsory, but as a form, it's an offer to you, and that is you can go there and give your vote to this or that, and so on. But it also makes the voting essentially potential. Like it's and that potential then settles into something. But in a way, like offer is even purer because like offers float about and might never really become an actuality, or they might keep on floating about and become actuality many times, like a person offering their digital text once, twice, X times, and the offer still stays there. The potential is there, and it actualizes to this person, this person, and so on. Okay, so, but so this kind of perception of actual and potential as definition of something that could happen under these and these conditions actually makes it just as definitory as something that is actual. Like this organization is like this, and this person is here, that's actuality, that's defined. But the potential is just as defined. It's just defined in the sense of, well, there's this thing that could happen if this and this happen. So if we take this and we think back to rights, there's a similar behavior. Your right is what you could use. Like, and once again, a right can be made to compulsory. It might be your right to vote might be a compulsory to vote. But this is another reason why I think the offer is an interesting or important concept or an important structure to bring into crypto space, where it's sorely lacking for anything more than what's like the conventional offer in this sense, because it also kind of helps to think about the structure of right in a more expanded sense. So, so the nature of an offer and the nature of a right being functioning the same way. In the right, we just think from the right forward, and in the offer, we think from the other end forward. In a way, like you having a right is actually a kind of an offer in some other context of you using that right. But okay, the final point in this, just training to keep into a summary form, is that the additional quality that comes from this simple system is that any context that makes this offer-like situations essentially creates potential, whether that's an offer or an organization, is actually capable of issuing new rights to its scope. Like if there is an organization, they make an offer that, hey, you people, if you write this application to us, you can gain the right to become our members, and or multiple rights that is in the role of a member. This is new rights in the world, but of course, concerning the scope of that organization. And this is actually the way the world is able to dynamically create new operative context, operative rule context. Like really the nation is not that different, or it's structurally it's the same. It's just a very large context that has this possibility to offer. So this, like using this simple structure, we also come to the point that actually new rights can be created. And every new context gains towards its context and towards its scope the possibility of creating new behaviors and new behavioral systems. So really like write is like looking from the end A, whereas the offer is looking from the end B, and there's a little bit of a different utilization, like different pragmatics to them, but they actually follow a similar structural pattern. I'll stop there. I can say that there is even a deeper layer to this, which is like we can actually break down the rights into a very simple system. And it's kind of based on this sort of, you just have two definition types. One is, this is definition in the actual, which means that this is in effect. And this is definition in the potential. And then you can place the definition in the potential in the context of actuality or vice versa. And just with that, you actually get everything here. If you have that, and you can make units like this is called this, it has an identity, it starts from here, ends here, it's defining actuality and it's defining potentiality. That gives you actually referentiality, because the potential can define like if this and this identity comes here, then it can make this and this happen, which is essentially referentiality. So from there you can create systems just with those two definition types, the actual and the potential, that are able to produce all these forms. That's, now I actually went to the deep end, but that's kind of like I can run it sometimes in a more logical manner, but that's basically the structural explanation of it in a summary sense, that there comes this sort of very simple system that actually builds to a very powerful system, because it actually creates this sort of both organizational and economic capability range that is way more considerable than, say, the common thinking in organizations or crypto. That's the kind of thing I've been developing for. Like this comes from my years in EXA. Like that's essentially the kind of systematic direction I've been developing.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, there's one more clarifying question, because when you said that when we have rights and offers, that one can be seen as like from perspective of A and the second one from the other end of B, what is the distinction of the observers, like the A and the B? So
I could have picked better terms. I would kind of maybe say the right is more from the point of view of the agent, and the offer is more like from the point of view of the context. Like offer creates a context. Right is more thinking about the agent, like creation of the agent. Like agent is essentially a collection of rights. This is also true even in, like, say, Facebook. Like you can take it down to, what is my identity in Facebook? Well, it's a term, some term, and then it's a login protocol. But really, in terms of functionality, is your right to post this or right to post this image, and the right is, of course, curtailed by the rules of image posting and so on. So that's like looking from the perspective of the agent, whereas the offer is more looking from the perspective of creating this context where agents can come. Like when I make an offer for the coffee cup for 10 euros, I'm creating a context. And if that's, let's say, an open offer, for then anybody with 10 euros can become righted to own the coffee cup, which then is a bunch of rights again. But yeah, like that's like context creation, whereas the rights are more concerned with agent creation.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
So yeah, okay. So that was a bit of a wormhole. Sorry about that. Hopefully it wasn't too too far off the topic.
That was great. we were missing one of those deep rights dive. Yeah, that was really good.
Yeah, this is actually on the table. It's one of the things I've been kind of now promising left and right to write, and started to kind of create this sort of simple description for us. Like, and it might be something to visit at some point, but like the tracing in itself is clear. One has to just explain it and how it functions. It's like, I won't open any more can of worms. I'll just say that it's interesting that actually things like history, like in terms of like programming, like or record that you have, say, in blockchain, just slots down into the same behavior. Like a history is a logic, like a blockchain history is a created logic that has, and you can create those similarly with the system. Like you could even create like modularly this identity that has this kind of history logic, which leaves a certain kind of record, which forms a trail, and this otherwise the same entity with the different history logic, and like follows the same pathway. But anyway, that's another kind of worms. Let's leave it mostly closed.
Yeah, just a short comment on what you said earlier, and I really like find it very useful to also think like these OBOC structures from the perspective of an actual existing organization and how they could benefit for it. And I just like started thinking, because in this when you have a more complex game, for instance, and let's say now that you enter the world of OBOC through through a game, some sort of game that is based on it at some level. So in these more complex games, you have like some sort of like tutorial, because they are complex, and how to kind of translate them to into live use. So kind of, I'm just like thinking, of course it's game specific and so on, but if you take like XORG, like what is it that you will kind of enter first? Should there be some sort of like space that opens up first with few like possibilities, and then once you think you have played enough with this, you can expand or something like that? In some like board games, this functions very well. Let's say terraforming Mars, for instance, like it gives you more alternatives. It first says that okay, use this standard text, but then expand or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea. Like because it can also be, it can be expanded, or it can be said that okay, here's the beginner game or the starting game, but then here's another game, another way to play it, and it's a little bit more complicated, but it comes later in the line. Like you can both kind of expand and you can also branch, like, but it makes a lot of sense in terms of explaining or like walking people in to this kind of structures, that you have, like, you actually don't really start from trying to make a game that, like, here's all the bells and whistles, like look at all the things you can do with this. Like it makes you would maybe like mention that to give people this vision of where they're walking ultimately, but like you would say, okay, here's a start and here's only these pieces. And this kind of actually connects to direction I was thinking of proposing for playtesting, if we get there, but hopefully, but which was kind of like this sort of like a simple idea of a scene, and then just adding a couple of pieces, like if you like put almost like floating, like here's a role, and this could be this scene here, It's like this sort of invisible canvas that we have around ourselves. Like it's not canvas like an image. It's really like a social canvas. And then maybe in that role it says like anybody can pick it, or it says whenever you say something something, then you pick it, and then somebody could pick the role from the canvas. But similarly, you could put on this canvas like there is a general now the rule just comes to everybody, which is like I don't know, every comment should last maximum 2 minutes to make a simple rule, which is ultimately I will of course fail constantly. Um, um, but it's like it's I don't know if it's like um, exactly fitting to be the beginning of the game, but it was kind of one direction I was thinking on this, like starting from the scene and painting this, like think of the scene as like invisible canvas, whether you are in a Zoom room or a physical room or in a city somewhere, but you have certain people and they like if they're part of it, they're kind of in this scene canvas, and then we can bring stuff that is already there, or we can put stuff during the scene even, but it allows for this sort of simplicity. Like there's like uh, maybe there's like 3 roles to be plucked, and you can select any role, uh, and you can select like the same role multiple times, but no other rules are allowed. Versus you have 3 roles and 1 rule. So the rule is effect all the time, but then you pick the roles, and that means you approach this rule in a different fashion, and so on and so forth. So this is kind of like towards the Photoshop organizational Photoshop idea, of course, but it also maybe is kind of something that relates potentially to Mikael's beginner game direction.
Yeah, and I find that like empty canvas is very powerful potentially, because sometimes when like teaching writing for people who haven't been like when you really like want to get people into the mood, one simple exercise to do, for instance, is like uh, close your eyes and just like focus on what you are hearing and write everything that you hear. And it's wonderful that first people of course notice, everyone notices the same things, like sounds of shoes, or sounds of like pens writing or something like that, but when you have been writing for 1 minute and you still have like 1 or 2 left, people start noticing strange things, and also like the air moving, and then finally like they start noticing, they finally notice that, hey, I can hear my thoughts, and so on. And you go from there, like you start hearing your imagination, and so on. So like really, and you can apply any sort of like filter here. You only notice these and these sort of like things because they are kind of part of the game, or so on, and so identify them, whether imaginary or like real, and bring them into your paper or something like that.
Mm. Yeah, I think it kind of underlines how really these kind of things are, like even the scene structure is kind of in use in every day, but it's not normally thought of like that. And I think it's a good thing because it allows this sort of bridging that, but it kind of sets up a different set of conditions that you can like the sort of changeability or switchability. You can also switch scenes. That's why I like the scene as this sort of canvas, because you can think, okay, now we actually switch scenes and take a different template, and the canvas around us changes. But like it also allows this sort of like following Mikael's tutorial pathway now, that like pointing out these different types of things to put there opens up different directions, like to add another, like if we have these roles, but then we add 1 goal. Now, if you have like selectable roles and you have a goal, it's a particular kind of situation, which is kind of like, let's say the goal is to let's say it's here, and then the goal is to come up with the, I don't know, best one, best one sentence description of a scene or definition of a scene. There's actually a lot of loose in that combination of, well, we don't now have the roles, but we have just a goal, but there's a lot of looseness to the goal, because like, how do we decide it's the best? Well, I guess it's up to us. We still have the goal of coming to the point that we have commonly decided that it's the best. But because the goal is there, it's still guiding us, potentially, if we follow that goal in itself. Versus we can also, that we have roles and say a rule, which is a different kind of functionality or different kind of state of being in itself. And of course, those can be combined. It's like you have like roles and a goal, maybe that same goal, like create the best one sentence definition of the scene. But then you have a rule that at the end, like there is a voting, say, between the different candidates that are on the table. Like anybody can write as many sentences as they can, and then there is a voting between them, and the most votes wins. That's a rule. Now the situation is changed again, because there is like some like pathway corridoring towards the end of reaching the goal. So by this, like these different types, like the rule, role, goal, you can have more nuance of how the scene is actually developed. But of course, you can add a write, you can add a move, which once again are very similar. You can add a premise, say, which is actually, or like a backstory, which is like it might not be like immediately present, but it kind of makes us look at the whole scene differently. Like if you make a backstory for it, and that affects the scene once again differently. And then you could have, for example, in the XORG, the one thing I thought of is the agency, which is interesting because it's not quite a role. It's almost like a role outside. That's something to take keep in mind. There's almost like a real person, but nobody's playing it. Everybody's kind of just assuming what they would want. So once again, a different tool. Now we are kind of getting to the Photoshop, because these different tools are like the brush and the pencil and the, I don't know, the lasso, and then the scene is the canvas. But then you have also kind of like you can change the canvas. I think you could add layers even, but anyway, like I think that opens up this way of expanding it. Like you, in the beginning, you have just a scene as this canvas, and then you have a couple of pieces you play, but you notice how things change because you have those pieces, like one rule and some selection of roles. But then you add another piece, then you combine it with the old ones, then you add another piece. And through that, you're kind of maybe on a kind of tutorial-like path. I don't know, does that make sense? Or like as a way of looking at this, like, I mean, in a way, it's a reconfiguration of OBOK, like the same themes, but in a more practical step-by-step manner.
Yeah, kind of. I think it makes, or I mean, if you have an existing or organization, then like should you kind of you need to first map something out of it before you kind of start modifying or kind of redescribing or imagining or so on. And I was just like thinking that what you kind of described with the canvas thing is kind of it also like and scenes as well, they kind of allow remapping or something like that.
I think it's completely possible. Like we kind of did this in a couple of sessions. Like there was this one session towards the end of which we had like Martin told examples of their organization, and then we started. Okay, that means that they have these people have these and these rights, and you have this and this scene of decision making and so on. And but it also opened up. But what if we change these rights? And I think it was overall a good session. And Martin was very enthused after that. And that's kind of like you can definitely go to like analyzing an existing organization overall as well.
Perhaps I have an idea of a possible situation to analyze at some point, if that was interesting for the group, which is very specific, and it's kind of still from the university environment. And like, just to give a very brief context. So my colleague is working at the Faculty of Pedagogy, and he is kind of trying to open up let's say the minds of the more conservative leaders of the university to different ideas. And now he is asking for funding, and the funding he wants to lock it in a crypto account of some sort or stable coin. And he wants to actually also create a course, which would be like normal university course related to topics like DAOs and crypto. But he wants to do this like mind shift or a policy shift, that the lecture of the course and the costs of the course are actually financed from the crypto account, which is controlled by a very simple and small DAO. So he's in a sense kind of taking out part of the responsibilities or rights of the university, and the funding flows somewhere outside, thus kind of saving funds for the university and giving more decision power outside. So in a sense, it's kind of one of possible proxy kind of ways of which we talk about, like towards the decentralization. And now he is kind of hitting his head against the faculty, because they are like poking into what's the legal framework, and who needs to agree with this, and shouldn't we actually need some like trading mandates, or not mandates, certificates and stuff like that. So it's for me it's a very interesting kind of example to think of, because it's quite bounded. It has very definite flows. And yeah, so this is my offer to analyze at some point possibly.
I think we definitely could do that, because I've done this analysis like over the years of various cases, and our experience has been like using this crypto or that or different economies is we haven't yet found a case we cannot really break down in, like, I mean, this has actually, like, in a way, like the OBOC is more looking, it's like the direction I was explaining earlier, which goes from very much bottom up, like from fundamentals upwards. Like the OPOC is more like also looking at like how you can also start top down in a way, like but you can kind of combine those approaches, but generally with the kind of pieces, if you have this sort of rights like structures, if you think you add offers, and then you can utilize the scene as a way of creating context, which is flexible, because you can also create, you know, scene relations, like, okay, this scene only moves to the other scene by this and this rule, like this kind of thing, which kind of opens it to be graph-like. also. But even smart graph, because then the edges are not just like associations; they have a logic potentially in them. So, like said, having done both economies, organizations, and also games, board games, there's hasn't really been a single situation is like, well, we cannot express this, like, and there's always like multiple ways of expressing, like, which I think is usually a sign of good models, that that like there's many ways to get to a certain goal, and some might be better in other ways, and some might be better in other ways, but we could, I think putting it on the table and doing that, like, it also might lead to an interesting, expression that might be maybe creating a bridge for people outside of crypto. Like, it's we give these and these people these rights. Maybe they all get the same. Maybe some get slightly different because they're an admin, so on. And then the rights relate to these scenes, like, oh, we have a right in this scene, and this scene has these rules, and from this scene, that's the only way to get to this other scene, and the only way to get to that scene is to fulfill this logic. And but that's very much more closer to a game-like description at the same time. Um,
I think this process of mapping is very, very interesting in the sense that it would allow the OBOK structure to work with any existing organization, and in the process of an organization mapping themselves, that allows for sort of like a self-reflection of power structures and
mm,
how things are like revealing patterns that might be hidden. I think that's really, really powerful. And that mapping is also, in a sense, could be a tutorial
yes.
in the way that you're learning while mapping, playing while mapping, and then maybe you can map the whole organization. Maybe you can map a specific setting. You can map the meetings because you just want to obok your meetings.
Yeah.
Or you just want to obok your space scheduling, whatever. I think we need that modularity. Unless, of course, there's like once, I hope this happens at some point, there's like a OBOK native organization that's born from scratch, from OBOK principles. But until that's a reality, mapping would have to be the bridge between existing and potential, let's say.
I definitely agree. There's even a couple of things I would add to that. One of them is it also kind of opens it up to modifiability, because the more it's modular, it's like, well, we can change this piece only. This was kind of apparent in the case of Martin's organization, like immediately led to this discussion, like, what if we give everybody the rights to propose new program versus only the curators, or what if we modulate it somehow? Like, it kind of makes you makes it more possible to think about that this is a like the clay is still wet, things and the paint is still wet, things can be moved and changed. And secondly, it opens up this that running or at least testing the organization can happen in many ways. Like, okay, now we have these rules, how could we play test this? And maybe there's an interesting way of testing it with humans, or with making a board out of it, or something, which of course opens it up situations where, like, you want to test an organization before you actually kind of set it to be active in itself. And of course, like, these kind of directions open up to kind of more wider playtesting perspectives.
And I think, like as Jakub was saying, I believe that this conservative faculty was sort of doing this mapping from what they know to what is possible. And of course, there will be a point where you will hit a wall in which there's the mapping is not enough, and that's where the mapping just reaches a certain point where you're lacking the depth that framework like OBOK has, and then you can plug in additional things. This modifiability is sort of like, once you have mapped your organization, you can plug in new things that expand it.
Yeah.
One question, like could the mapping be kind of done by kind of this sort of or something like that, that are the actual like components of OBOK kind of, or something like this, kind of to get the compatibility with any sort of like OBOK type of game or something like that?
Yeah, like, I mean, if I get you right, in a way, like it would be in the same terms, like the terms that are in OBOK. I think that's definitely doable, and it would be also a way to polish the OBOK, is to, because I mean, there's most of them, like in the end, there is this list of aspects. It's kind of covers most of them, but they're, first of all, just a list. They're not that defined. And then secondly, there might be some things missing, some things a little bit overlapping that should be squeezed to one thing. So in a way, like this case could be used to polish the OBOK to do precisely that. Because I don't think there's anything in the structure that limits that. It's more like, oh, we need this piece. Or actually, let's define this piece like in this way or that way. Like that would be kind of like the pathway towards that.
It's also kind of what it associates for me is that it's a bit different approach than when we start kind of mapping specific organization or subset of the organization like from the ground up. But this is more like, or if it's kind of taking the language and implicit or explicit mapping or frameworks which perhaps some people in the organization have, and kind of either using the OBOK language to make it more like deeper or more accurate or complex, or selecting a subset of OBOK components which map more nicely, more understandably to their language, perhaps, or something like that. If that's what I'm hearing in a sense.
Yeah, and I think like in terms of language, I think it can be nicer. It's certainly nicer than, say, reading code from a DAO. But I think the kind of what it kind of comes this sort of unifying language, which is like maybe most close to game-like representation. It's like what you're really giving is rules to play, because playing kind of comprises, well, everything that happens in our organization can be thought of as play. It's just we take it seriously, so we don't call it play, but it's still kind of fancy piece of imagination that like we have to kind of use our imagination seriously to see somebody as a graphic designer or somebody as the boss. And when they say, oh, this must be done next week, we imagine on top that this person is the boss, and therefore I really have to now start taking the role that I have to do this. It's like we have to put that thing from our heads on top of the actual expressions. So in a way, it's play. But and I think it's an interesting kind of direction that, like, ultimately these sort of game-like representations come as this sort of middle way between here's an organization, here is a game, etc. All of those directions. So playing around with that would be, or trying to develop that would be, I think, a useful thing. And maybe that's I'm tragically aware that we're getting quite low on time, and we might actually miss the kind of possibility to actually play test. but this actually might have this sort of light at the end of the tunnel that maybe we could take that framework for next session and play test from that kind of a calibration, factoring of OBOK onwards.
What Pekka said earlier, like that this sort of like game structures like allow us to kind of widen the possibilities of the organization and so on, like, and of course through using imagination and structures and so on. So it's like okay, we have this sort of like situation that you, Jakub, described, and then if we can kind of if we can create like new shared affordances, like new ways to and understanding how to do like things. Okay, we can use this chair not just to sit, but to break the window or something like in a metaphorical way. So I think this OBOK like structure could work pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. What about others? How does this sound as a direction, maybe for playtesting next time, and playtesting with the goal of kind of cleaning up or refactoring the OBOK?
Yeah, I think us working through the mapping mechanisms is also a tutorial for us to like test and clean.
Yeah, agreed. Actually, yeah, that's another, like taking Jakub's case and mapping it. It's we can choose between those. Like we can.
I could even invite my colleague who has the deep understanding of very specific stuff if that was the choice at some point.
I mean, it would be interesting. I think would be useful also, like if you have any documentation of what the structure is, like to post it beforehand, because it just makes things faster. Like if people can think through beforehand. Like I don't think it's necessary, but it would be helpful.
I will translate it from Czech.
Okay, yeah.
It's kind of done already, so no need to be,
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, but so what would your preference be, like you all, that we start from Jakub's case and or
should we test first and create some sort of like framework and then apply it to this case once we kind of know what we can do with it, or what do you say?
I think maybe they can even be done side by side, parallel. Like we bring
Sounds
the
great.
case to the table, and maybe with a little bit of update, actually the kind of make a little bit cleaner list of things. But it's really like we don't need the definitions yet, but we have like the different definitions. I've been actually making a revised list of things like putting these associations that you have rights and then you have moves, etc., like somehow associated with it, and so on. Like just have this list of things, and then these structures like scenes and roles, which are more actually containers for this kind of like in a way, scene is a container that can contain a role. Role is a container that can contain many rights in itself. Like I think we can have those pieces as kind of like raw playing pieces, and then we bring the case in, and then we add or modify what we have on the list or what we have on the OBOK palette, depending on what we get from the case itself. I think that works. Because I know that the pieces can already cover it. It just probably better to put that also in play. And I will also write a small addition to probably to the existing document, which is the token, like, and this sort of, from this sort of units of distribution view, like they're actually kind of just way of packaging and mobilizing things that are in the organization, rights, etc. But they allow them to be expanded in their functionality by being able to transfer, etc. and so on.
This is a off-topic sharing, which I wanted to do at the beginning, but unfortunately wasn't here. So I'll take the liberty to do it here. Yeah, so thanks to Pekko and the work in this group, actually. So I got accepted to the university, art school, art university, specifically the game media thingy. So and my kind of project is yeah, basically this for the next 2 years. So and the currency playground. So yeah, so just wanted to share. And thanks for also helping make that happen.
Well, congratulations also to you, because you also made it, like you made it happen actually, and like said earlier in the message, I think it's really like, in a way you earned it because you were part of this sort of collective brain cloud, whatever we are, and it's about like mutual development of thought, which we are all kind of immersed in. So like it's nice that there is a new context, a new scene, and it expands this. And I think let's definitely think about how this can also help that context and help or provide tools for currency, etc. So yeah, applause is in order, although it's like silent applause is the...
Thank you.
but okay, so, and maybe that's also good, bridging. But if we take Jakob's case on the table and we take the OBOK on the table and use both the case, use the case to revive OBOK and use the OBOK to explain the case. There's a potential direction for next time. But I think like otherwise, like I said, my idea was to get to the playtesting around this scene as canvas. That was my proposal, but I think we are slightly late on that, which is not new, but this kind of things happen. But
I need to go in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
No, but I think it's maybe like all of this was substantial, so I don't think it's like, for me it's not a problem. I mean, it's some kind of a failure in terms of like, it would be good to follow those, but if everything is substantial, like it's also progress in this sense.
Yeah, I agree. We had an inertia got us through, so
yes.
Yeah, but it was good.
But I do think we're like, just with a bit of polish, we're also starting to surprisingly develop a kind of a library of things, or a toolbox, maybe is a better term. But like I think the OBOK direction, but also if we want to take it like this sort of like meme forms are really based on, and that should be attributed that they are based on like the approaches here, or the genes, that we could include it in our toolbox, and then it starts to get quite interesting, which might also be useful for other things in the future. including bad jokes or good jokes. I cannot tell which jokes are good or bad. Like that's my favorite jokes are really bad.
I have a feeling that Toolbox will become a meme.
Somebody can make it into a meme. Yes, that's I'm still bad at memeing unless there's a game structure for it. Then I can be okay with it. But yeah, let's continue from there. And okay, I'll put my list the token. I'll make an underline that I'll add that because yeah, it's been waiting anyway. It's mentioned earlier, but and then Jakub, if you have anything, even a short description of like here's what happens in there, like that would be good, and we can go from there. But
Yeah,
hey,
I'll get that ready.
Thanks. I was probably more talkative today than usual. Sorry about that. It's been a hyper day. I've been kind of jumping back and forth between different things, and it makes me sometimes like this sort of too hyper in general. But I promise to be more relaxed the next time. It's the environment's fault. Yeah.
It was very inspiring. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I'll press